Tired of seeking a suitable husband for his wayward daughter, the wealthy Antoine decided to marry her off to the first comer. As he watched who entered the restaurant, his thoughts were interrupted. The Rosemary restaurant was rightfully considered one of the best in the city. Sparkling crystal glasses, glittering under the chandelier's rays, and impeccably set tables with pristine white tablecloths spoke of the impeccable taste and high status of the owner. However, today, this atmosphere of luxury only served as an irritating backdrop for Antoine's growing parental discontent. Opposite him sat his only daughter, Olivia, whose demeanor clearly communicated her confusion about why her father had kept her here for over 2 hours. In business circles, Gilbert was known as a man with an iron grip, having built his empire from scratch. He achieved everything through hard work, day and night, and desperately wanted his daughter to continue his legacy. However, instead of helping her father, Olivia spent his money on trinkets and frivolous entertainments. Her life was one long party, without any purpose or meaning. "Olivia," Antoine began, "tell me one thing. Here we sit, and have you even once asked how things are going in the restaurant?" She put down her fork and gave her father a look full of childish resentment. "Dad, why do you always talk about work? I want to relax, to enjoy life. Isn't that what we live for? Especially since I'm your only daughter and the heiress to all this." "Heiress?" Antoine flared up. "Are you talking about my departure? You'll have a long wait. And forget about thinking it. You don't appreciate either my efforts or what I give you. I've spoiled you too much. And now I'm paying for my kindness. But it's not my fault." Olivia threw up her hands. "I am who I am. I love beautiful things, expensive cars, and traveling. Isn't it good that I have taste?" "No, daughter, it's not bad, of course. It's just a pity that's the only thing that fills your life. You see nothing but your own whims. How many times have you been in a car accident in the last 6 months? 3? 4? It's unimaginable. To sink 2 motorcycles in a river just for a couple of good photos. And how many times have I paid for your car repairs? You change them like gloves. Valerie has long since lost count of the damage caused." Her father's words struck Olivia to the core. Deep down, she knew he was right. But admitting it was humiliating. "I want you to get married," her father said in a tone that brooked no argument. Olivia gasped in astonishment. "Married? Dad, what are you talking about? I'm only 22. I'm not ready yet. I want to live for myself. At least for a while." "Whether you want it or not doesn't matter to me," her father interrupted. "You need a husband who will instill a sense of responsibility in you and teach you to appreciate what you have." "And who is this lucky man?" she asked mockingly. "I haven't decided yet." "The main thing is that he is a suitable candidate," Antoine cut her off. "It doesn't matter who he will be, maybe even the first one to come through the doors of my restaurant soon. The main thing is that you stop acting like a spoiled rich girl. And remember, if you refuse, all your bank cards will be blocked today." At that moment, a young man walked into the restaurant. He wore tattered jeans and a faded shirt of indeterminate color. An old backpack hung over his shoulders, a spitting image of a street vagrant, only lacking a beard. Looking for the manager, the stranger quietly asked the porter, "Tell me, is there still a vacancy for a cleaner or a kitchen assistant?" Seeing him, Antoine experienced mixed feelings. "It seems we have our first candidate," he said with a smile, looking at Olivia. "The young man clearly seeks a job, and maybe something else. What do you say to that, daughter?" Olivia was in a state of deep shock. She understood perfectly well that her father was merely using this vagrant as a threat tool to force her to change and follow the path he had chosen for her. "Dad," she finally whispered, "why are you doing this to me?" But her father seemed not to hear her at all. "Young man," Antoine addressed the guest, "did you want something? I am the owner of this establishment. I'm Antoine, and this is my daughter Olivia. My name is Victor. I'm looking for a job, any job. I really need the money." At that moment, Antoine noted with pleasure that Olivia was looking at Victor with undisguised contempt. "Just what I need," he smiled. Meanwhile, Victor was looking around the restaurant hall with genuine interest. "You say you need money?" the businessman continued, switching to a more familiar tone. "Well, that's a normal aspiration. I've always respected men of character. Here's what we'll do. Starting tomorrow, you'll work in the kitchen as an assistant to my chef, Rudolfo. Once you get used to it and find your groove, I'll take you on as a waiter. I hope you have a passport. And bring a health certificate." Joy sparked in Victor's eyes. "Thank you, I won't let you down, you can be sure of that." Antoine smirked. "We'll see about that. And keep in mind, I have very big plans for you. I won't say anything in advance, but if you show savvy and diligence, you'll never have to sleep on the streets again." Olivia couldn't take it anymore, and grabbing her purse, she stormed out of the restaurant. "Olivia!" Antoine called after her, but she had already slammed the door. The businessman looked at Victor. "I think we understand each other, young man." "Yes, exactly, understood," Victor agreed, shifting from foot to foot. "Well then, give me your documents and go meet the chef. He is now your king and god, well, besides me, of course. I think you'll receive a warm welcome there. I'll make sure of it." Victor nodded and, handing the businessman all the papers he had, headed to the kitchen. At the same time, Olivia was wandering down the street, oblivious to everyone around her. Pulling out her phone from her purse, she shared the recent events with a friend as she walked. "Can you believe it, Vic, what Dad came up with? He wants to marry me off." "Really? Because of who then?" Olivia bit her lip painfully, detecting a hint of mockery in her friend's voice. "You won't believe it. He wants to marry me off to the first person who comes along. To a vagrant who will be working in our restaurant's kitchen." "Does he even know about this?" her friend persisted. "Vic, come on, you're being childish." "Well, he probably knows. Dad stayed there to talk things over with him, and I just couldn't stand it and left," Olivia said, hurt. There was silence on the phone for a moment, and then Victoria said, "Well, if you want my opinion, there's nothing supernatural about it. Your father has money to burn, and he can turn any beggar into a prince. And that he's a vagrant isn't really a problem. Dress him up, clean him up, and you'll have a suitor." Olivia translated her friend's words into a joke, although the unpleasant truth stung her at heart. After politely saying goodbye, she called a taxi and went home. Meanwhile, completely different events were unfolding in the restaurant's kitchen. Victor, on legs that refused to bend, cautiously pushed the door and crossed the threshold into the sanctum of this five-star establishment. The noise, commotion, and clatter of pots crashed over him like a wave. The smell of fried onions, garlic, and something sweetly tender instantly whetted Victor's appetite. "And what are you doing here?" a sharp voice snapped, making him flinch. Victor turned his head to the left and was taken aback. Standing there, arms crossed on his chest, was a man of impressive size. On his head was a white cap that seemed about to fall off his bald head. Victor was taken aback, not expecting such a reception. The thought flashed through his mind that Antoine might have exaggerated the warm welcome waiting for him in the kitchen. "Antoine sent me to you," Victor began, trying to choose the right words. "He said that you would take me on for a job." The burly man in the cap snorted discontentedly. "For a job, you say?" Well. Antoine helped out. "Yes, he loves to make promises. And then I have to clean up the mess. I'm Rudolph. Please address me as such and nothing else." Victor left the remark unanswered, continuing to stand at attention. "So, what can you do?" asked the chef after a brief pause. Victor was at a loss. "I can do a lot of things." "Is that so?" Rudolph smirked. Well. Looks like we've got a talent here, huh? But more specifically? Can you peel potatoes?" Of course, Victor nodded, hoping that was what was expected of him. And cut meat? Asked Rudolph, pointing toward a huge piece of beef lying on the cutting table. That too, Victor replied, a bit embarrassed. Well, good, squinted Rudolph, we'll check that right now. Here's a knife. He tossed Victor a heavy cleaver, which thudded onto the table. Cut this meat into cubes 2 centimeters on each side and quickly, we don't have time, Rudolph said, then turned away to continue giving instructions to other chefs. Victor picked up the knife, turning it over in his hands. He was certainly not a professional chef, but despite this, he diligently got to work, trying not to pay attention to the looks from the other staff. The task was challenging. Listen, buddy, whispered one of the chefs, a young guy with freckles. Don't pout. Rudolph, well, how do I put it rightly, is a complicated person, doesn't like newcomers and definitely doesn't tolerate the slow ones. So, if you want to stay here, work fast and make no mistakes. Thank you, Victor nodded, still focusing on cutting the meat. And, another thing, the freckled guy continued, he absolutely loves it when everything is done exactly as he instructs. If he said the cubes should be 2 centimeters, then they must be exactly 2 centimeters. Not a millimeter more, not a millimeter less. Otherwise what? Victor asked, cutting the meat at double speed. Well, what else? You'll find yourself outside the restaurant faster than you can say soup. The freckled chef winked and returned to his work. Victor tried his hardest. His hands moved nonstop, but still, a few cubes were slightly larger or smaller than necessary. He was mentally preparing to be fired, imagining being thrown out the door, when suddenly he heard Rudolph's voice, who was carefully examining the cuts. Not bad. For a newcomer, you're managing, but you need to be quicker. I'll try, Victor muttered, feeling like a schoolboy being instructed by a teacher. Trying is not enough, you need to work, the head chef said, taking the knife from Victor's hands and swiftly cutting the remaining meat into perfectly shaped cubes. Look and learn. Victor watched his movements, holding his breath. Be here at 6 tomorrow morning, Rudolph said, finishing his demonstration. And don't even think about being late. Meanwhile, go wash these pots, our dishwasher is sick. Victor nodded, sensing the opportunity to learn from a real professional. He understood the job would be tough and the chef wouldn't go easy on him, so he was ready for any challenge. Victor really needed the job, and he was willing to do anything to earn the respect of Rudolph and the restaurant's owner. What he didn't know were the plans the owner had for him and the role he was destined to play in this whole story. Victor sighed and tackled the dirty work. He washed pots and pans until the evening. His palms turned red and soft from the cleaning agents. His back ached from bending, but he didn't complain. Rudolph occasionally cast a stern, watchful look at him. Victor felt this and tried to be careful yet quick. By the end of the shift, he was barely standing from fatigue. The head chef left an hour before the restaurant closed, leaving his charges to tidy up. In reality, most of this fell to Victor, as everyone seemed to think it was their duty to dump their work on the newcomer. The doorman, Mitch, looked at him sympathetically but said nothing, just patted him on the shoulder to encourage him. The evening city, drowning in millions of lights, stretched out behind the restaurant's huge panoramic windows. Victor opened the door and took a deep breath of the fresh autumn air. At that moment, he noticed a foreign car parked a few dozen meters from the entrance. The door opened, and a girl stepped out, her face vaguely familiar to him. Hello, Victor. How was your day? How's the new job? Hello, he replied a bit bewildered. Oh, it's you, Olivia? Sorry, I didn't recognize you. Going to be rich, are you? The girl appreciated the joke. Well, yes, going to be rich. But really, how much richer could I get? Victor, I was hoping to offer you a ride, if you have time, that is, Olivia said, blushing slightly, feeling awkward. A ride? Victor raised his eyebrows in surprise. Me? With you? Yes, what's so strange about that? I just wanted to show you the city at night in my car, Olivia clarified, nodding towards the foreign car. Thanks, of course, the guy scratched the back of his head. But I feel a bit awkward, in such a car, you know, I'm not from your circle. Don't be silly. Come on, get in, but let's keep it informal. No need for you to address me formally. A shadow of doubt crossed Victor's face. Sure, but maybe another time. But Olivia was always good at getting her way, especially considering her father's very real threat to cut her off financially. All right, let's go, Victor finally gave in. But only if it's no trouble for you. Olivia smiled. Her plan had worked. Despite all his doubts, Victor had agreed. As they got into the car, Victor, as if enchanted, began inspecting the luxurious interior. His eyes widened in amazement. Wow, he whispered in admiration. I've never ridden in such a car before. Do you like it? Asked Olivia, unable to suppress a smile. Very much, Victor replied, it's incredible. Well then, relax and enjoy the ride. I'll show you the most beautiful spots, Olivia commanded and turned on some soft music. Victor nodded in agreement and reclined in the seat. Olivia drove through the night city, aiming to get to the park and promenade quickly. The cabin was quiet, only interrupted by the soft music and the calm voice of the girl narrating the city's landmarks. I've never seen anything like this, Victor marveled, struggling to find words to express his emotions. Olivia watched Victor with pleasure and, of course, noticed how his eyes lit up with joy as he took in the beauty of the night city. Deep down, she was pleased to give such joy to the homeless guy, but at the same time, she felt awkward about the game her father had started. Do you really like it? Olivia asked, stopping at a traffic light. Yes, Victor replied. Thank you so much for the ride. And I'm really glad you suggested it. You're welcome, just relax. Just then, Olivia noticed in the rearview mirror a dark SUV that had been following them for about half an hour. What was this? A coincidence, or was someone following her? Could her father have assigned someone to watch her? Quite possibly. It was his style. But why so persistently follow her? Is something wrong? Victor asked cautiously. You look pale. Olivia shook her head. No, it's nothing, just my imagination. As if to confirm her words, the mysterious SUV quickly turned into a nearby alley. Yet, an uneasy feeling remained. The drive lasted about an hour, during which they managed to chat about various things, work, dreams, and life in general. Olivia learned that Victor had lost his parents early and lived with his grandmother Zara for a while. When she passed away, he ended up in an orphanage, from which he ran away after a year, living by the laws of the street. To her great surprise, Victor turned out to be quite an interesting conversationalist. Looks can often be deceiving. Sometimes you look at someone and see nothing special, but just a few words later, you can't pull yourself away from a conversation with them. Meanwhile, the girl deftly turned into an inconspicuous street lined with expensive mansions. Slowing down at the massive gates, Olivia smiled. Here we are, this is where I live. Oh, nice place, Victor began, but he stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Antoine standing at the gates. And there's Dad, Olivia whispered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Hope you won't get in trouble? I mean, for taking me for a ride? Victor asked cautiously. But the girl deliberately left his question unanswered and got out of the car. Olivia! Antoine exclaimed. Why are you back so early? I hoped you'd spend the time productively and... He squinted at Victor, finally get to know each other better. What's going on? I must be missing something, Victor whispered, looking bewildered at Olivia and her father. Dad, let's talk about this some other time, she started to say, but Antoine interrupted her. Victor, I offered you a job at my restaurant. You're doing well, aren't you, Rudolph? Only then did Olivia and Victor notice the head chef, who had emerged from the shadows at the gates. Yes, Antoine, Victor is indeed a promising and quite valuable employee, Rudolph said with a sly smile. Of course, he still has areas to improve, but he definitely has potential. Excellent, continued Antoine. Well, now it seems time to talk about serious matters. Here's the thing. Olivia, my daughter, needs a reliable husband, so I have no doubt you would make an excellent spouse for her. What? Victor was flustered. Antoine, but I'm just. Don't rush to conclusions. I am offering you my daughter's hand in marriage, Antoine continued, ignoring the guest's bewilderment. Victor began to protest. Is this some kind of joke? There's nothing you need to understand, Olivia, Antoine addressed his daughter. Here is your fiancé. This marriage will benefit us all. No, father. Olivia cried out. I don't want to marry him, I don't love him. But in her father's eyes, she saw something that made her go silent and bite her tongue. A tense pause hung in the air. Victor, glancing at Olivia secretly, saw not only a plea in her eyes, but something else. He couldn't quite understand what it was, but it stirred in him a desire to speak up. After all, he was a man and couldn't allow this girl to be treated like this. Antoine, I truly appreciate your offer, but I simply cannot marry your daughter. What? What did you say? Antoine exclaimed in fury. I cannot marry a girl who doesn't love me, Victor responded calmly. Olivia is not an object to be bought or sold. Antoine clenched his fists in anger but held back from replying. Olivia couldn't hold back her tears, grateful for his courage. Rudolph smirked but quickly covered his mouth with his hand. It wasn't worth getting on the boss's bad side. Gilbert paused for a moment, then, with a resigned wave, said, Fine, it's your choice. Do as you please. And you, Victor, keep working. Don't think this conversation will change anything. The young wanderer nodded calmly, wished them all a good night, and walked away. Rudolph followed him with a careful gaze, grimacing. To be honest, he hadn't liked Victor from the start, and if it were up to him, he would have thrown him out in a heartbeat. But since Antoine favored this wanderer, he didn't do so, at least, not yet. Olivia entered the house, avoiding eye contact with her stepmother, Valerie, a woman only 10 years her senior. It seemed there was nothing unusual about her father marrying a younger woman after her mother's death, but the relationship between stepmother and stepdaughter had been strained from the beginning. Well, here you are. I hope this time, no adventures and no broken cars. Valerie asked with irony. I'm here, as you can see. Olivia muttered, and, entering her room, collapsed on the couch fully dressed. Suddenly, her heart ached. She imagined her mother's gentle hands, her kind gaze, her warm embrace. Mom, she whispered, and salty tears rolled down her cheeks like pearls. How I wish you were here. Why can't you protect me from all of this? Her mind filled with sweet images from the distant past, nights spent with her mother in this very room, her childhood. Nadia had always known how to soothe her daughter, tell her stories, braid her hair. Olivia, her mother's voice sounded in her memory like a gentle melody. You are the most precious thing I have. Be strong, don't let anyone hurt you. Strong? Olivia whispered, speaking mentally to her late mother. And at that moment, a bitter smile touched her lips. How can I be strong here? When your own father puts you up for sale, ready to hand you over to the first stranger just to be rid of you. Olivia got up from the bed and walked to the window, looking out at the night city, sparkling with lights. She thought about how things could have been different, how everything changed after her mother's death. She recalled a recent conversation with Valerie. Olivia, her stepmother hissed, casting a scornful glance her way, you need to understand that you're not the only heir to this fortune. Right now, you're just a burden to your father. Don't try to act like a princess. You're just a foolish girl onto whom money fell out of nowhere. And why are you counting my money? Olivia retorted. The stepmother merely smirked and winked knowingly. I hate her. Olivia whispered, emerging from a sea of memories, clenching her fists. I hate this woman who tore our family apart and never gives me a moment's peace. Of course, she knew all too well that her father loved Valerie. Antoine often spoke about it, addressing his young wife with a tenderness and care he never showed toward Olivia. "It's unfair," she whispered. "Mother would never have allowed this. She always said that family is the most valuable thing in life, the whole family, not just one person." Sniffling, she buried her face in the pillow. In that moment, she felt lost, alone, and utterly unwanted. Most of her extravagant stunts with spending money had only one aim: to get her father's attention. Recently, it seemed easier for him to buy her off than to face real issues. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Olivia flinched, tensing. Who could it be at such a late hour? "Olivia," her father's voice sounded through the door. "Are you still awake?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. "No, Dad," Olivia replied, hoping he wouldn't notice the strain in her voice from crying. "I just can't sleep." "May I come in?" "Yes, of course." The door opened, and Antoine entered the room. He looked tired, with a hint of concern etched on his face. "Olivia, I wanted to apologize," he began, coming closer to her bed, "for what I said to you today. I was wrong, and about Victor as well." Olivia remained silent, watching him with disbelief. "I know you're not happy about Valerie," Antoine continued, "but she's important to me. I want to be with her, you understand? And if your personalities clash, well, who's to blame for that? And what about me, Dad?" Olivia asked, her gaze filled with pain. "Don't I matter to you? Do you even think about me?" "Of course I do," Antoine said, moving toward the door. "You're my daughter, but Valerie, she's my family too." Olivia nodded and, after wishing her father good night, turned away toward the wall. The night passed quickly, and morning found Victor already on his way. The young wanderer walked down the street, quietly whistling and lost in his thoughts. Overall, he had enjoyed working in the kitchen, even though he'd only managed one shift so far. Entering the restaurant hall, Victor nodded amiably at Mitch and headed toward the kitchen. "Good morning, Rudolph." Victor greeted the chef from a distance, trying to make his voice sound confident. "Ah, here comes the son-in-law, Victor," the chef drawled mockingly, casting a glance at the storage room where Victor would be working. "Well, get to it. The bags of potatoes are over there. Unload them and don't even think about slacking." Victor nodded and headed to the designated spot. As he passed by the work tables, he felt the stares of the other chefs and assistants on him. They whispered, chuckled, and some, especially the younger waitresses, threw curious, sidelong glances his way. Victor clearly felt out of place, as if he had been thrown into a tank of piranhas, ready to pounce on him at any moment. "Ah, here comes the henpecked husband," he heard a whisper behind him. "Gilbert must have made his daughter marry someone like that," another voice replied. Victor clenched his fists, feeling anger rising in his chest. Henpecked? He was just trying to earn a living, and he certainly didn't want to be humiliated like this. Even though Victor tried to ignore the whispers and snickering, it was hard. Every glance and biting remark stung. Yes, he might be a street wanderer, but did that really matter? "What are you daydreaming about, Victor?" came Rudolph's sharp voice right next to his ear. "Come on, unload those vegetables." Victor flinched and returned to his work. "Victor, are you really dating Olivia?" one of the chefs asked with open curiosity, coming up to him. "I heard she throws money around like it's nothing." "So, what do you say? Are they lying, or is it true?" "Well, no, it's just, we." Victor stammered, his cheeks reddening. Truthfully, he didn't even know how to explain it properly. But he certainly couldn't admit he was just a wanderer whom the restaurant owner had chosen as a son-in-law to discipline his spoiled daughter. "I hardly know anything about Olivia. We've only met once," he mumbled, looking away. "Hey, don't be shy, man," the chef grinned, thinking he was being friendly. "She's rich. Consider yourself lucky." Victor laughed bitterly. Lucky. Ha. Yeah, sure, not in this life. During his lunch break, Victor avoided his kitchen co-workers, stepping outside to get some fresh air. But even here, he was not left alone. Oh, the son-in-law is out for a stroll, came a voice from behind him. Victor turned around. It was a group of waiters, looking at him with mocking expressions. What do you want? Oh, we're just imagining the future that's in store for you, one of them said, stepping forward. Living with Olivia Gilbert is like winning a few million in the lottery, maybe even $1 billion. That's really none of your business, Victor replied coldly. Oh, come on, we're just joking, another waiter tried to lighten the mood. Don't take it personally. I'm not offended. Resentment is a heavy burden to carry, Victor replied and headed back to the storeroom. He felt uncomfortable discussing such a sensitive topic with anyone. And what was there to discuss, really, when everything had already been decided? Olivia had her own life, and he had his, no matter what Antoine thought. Soon the lunch break was over, and Victor threw himself back into work. Today promised to be a challenging day, mainly because the manager, Hector, was sick. The head chef, Rudolph, temporarily took over his duties. He quickly removed his apron and chef's hat, strutting into the hall with a triumphant air. The waitresses immediately looked disappointed. Tips were unlikely today. The greedy chef would pocket everything for himself. Normally, the tips went to those who earned them, but Rudolph saw things differently. He believed in the simple notion that money goes to money, and on his way to wealth, he didn't mind taking from others, even through blatant skimming. The workday dragged on painfully slowly. Victor tried to ignore the sneers and sideways glances, but it was tough. The tension was palpable. He repeatedly heard whispers behind his back and saw people exchanging looks. By evening, the restaurant began to fill with guests. The sound of voices, clinking dishes, and laughter filled the air. Rudolph, now acting as the manager, greeted guests, seated them, and smiled as if nothing was amiss. Just then, an elderly woman entered the restaurant. She wore a worn-out coat, and her hair was disheveled. She clutched a tattered handbag that vaguely resembled a mesh bag. Approaching the counter, she said, out of breath, "Excuse me, could I have a hot tea and a roll?" Rudolph looked at her with disgust. "Hey, old lady, don't you see? There's a line here, and everything's by reservation. Go somewhere simpler," he snapped. The elderly woman lowered her head in confusion. Victor, who had witnessed the scene, went pale. Feeling sympathy for the elderly, likely lonely, woman, he approached the counter. "Rudolph, may I order some tea and a roll for the customer?" Victor asked timidly. "Feeling sorry for the old hag? Maybe you'll sit down with her too? You think I'll cover it with the register's money?" Rudolph sneered. "No need, I'll pay for it myself," Victor replied calmly. "Oh, feeling generous, are we? Do you even have money to cover her meal?" Rudolph continued sarcastically. "Barely here a week, son-in-law, and already full of yourself. Relying on your father-in-law, huh?" Victor looked away, embarrassed. Behind him, he heard the usual snickers. He hesitated, then took some money out of his pocket and paid for the woman's order in front of everyone. People in the hall immediately began pointing at him. But Victor ignored it. He simply wanted to help this elderly woman, who, like him, had become a target for ridicule. He went to the kitchen, personally brought her tea and a roll, and even added a modest dinner to her order, all covered by his payment. "Thank you, you have a kind heart," the woman whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Victor smiled and gently touched her hand. "Not a chance. You won't get anything good from that old hag. You're probably expecting some nice tips." "Ha! Don't hold your breath," Rudolph remarked with open irritation. Victor swallowed his resentment in silence and trudged back to the kitchen. He had a mountain of work ahead, which left no time for idle chatter. But just as he was unloading the latest shipment from the suppliers, a waitress quietly called to him. "Hey, that old lady's calling for you." Can you go see her quickly? Rudolph will give us all a hard time if you don't. Victor gulped nervously and hurried into the dining area. The elderly woman had finished her meal and was patiently waiting for her helper to return. As he approached the table, Victor gave her a questioning look. She smiled and said softly, "Thank you, young man. I really needed your help today. I'm actually looking for a good, kind person for this restaurant, and I think I've found him." "What do you mean?" "Found who?" "What are you talking about?" he asked, surprised. "Don't worry. I haven't lost my mind, and I don't have dementia," the elderly woman replied. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she removed her wig and looked around with a sharp gaze. "I'm Ina Crossman, head of the Quality Control Department. Today, I visited your establishment incognito, and I witnessed how guests are treated here. You were the only one who showed genuine care for an old, frail woman. You're exactly the kind of person this restaurant needs. And I'm sure that many of the staff here will be ashamed of their behavior." Rudolph, who had been watching the scene, stood frozen in place, as if turned to stone. He was in shock, realizing his days at the restaurant were numbered. Meanwhile, Ina asked for the restaurant owner to be called over. She made the request with an air of authority that made everyone noticeably anxious, as she wielded enough power to shut the place down instantly. "I didn't expect to be treated this way in your establishment, Antoine. I saw how your new employee stood up for me, while this rude man behaved disgracefully," Ina said when the owner arrived. Rudolph, pale as chalk, tried to justify himself, but the head of quality control cut him off before he could utter a word. "Today will be your last day at this restaurant. You're fired," she declared. "What? But I'm the head chef here." Rudolph stammered. "No buts. I saw everything. You treated me disgracefully, and I won't tolerate it," Ina said firmly. The unlucky chef had no reply to that. Instead, he silently walked outside with his head lowered. Everyone present was in shock. Victor smiled at the guest and said, "Thank you." At that moment, Antoine joined the conversation. "Ina, I apologize on behalf of myself and the entire staff." "Victor, well done. You showed kindness where others couldn't, and I hope you'll stay on with us. You're exactly the kind of person we need." Victor smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest at having his actions finally appreciated. "Thank you, Antoine. Yes, I'm ready to keep working and do my best." "You see, Antoine," Ina said, "you can have good people working at your establishment, and you should understand that. Instead of putting down your employees, create a supportive work environment or I'll be forced to shut it down. And believe me, that wouldn't be difficult." Antoine stayed silent, realizing he had made mistakes. After Ina left, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed completely. The staff exchanged glances, unsure of what would happen next. Victor felt that the attitude toward him had shifted dramatically. Now, he was treated with respect. Antoine looked at him and remarked jokingly, "Well, son-in-law, it seems you're already the hero of our restaurant. I get the impression you're climbing the career ladder, skipping a few steps. Congratulations. From today, you'll be training as a backup manager. We'll see where it goes from there." The staff responded with a round of applause, ready to lift the former wanderer on their shoulders. Victor smiled awkwardly, still not fully grasping what was happening. He hadn't sought fame, he had simply wanted to help someone in need. Meanwhile, Olivia, sitting in her car, noticed a dark SUV following her. At first, she didn't pay much attention. But as the car persistently kept its distance, she started to feel uneasy. Tensing, she accelerated, trying to lose the tail, but the SUV didn't fall back. "Dad," Olivia said, calling her father, "someone is following me." "What?" Antoine asked worriedly. "What dark SUV, Olivia? Are you sure it's not just a coincidence? Try not to attract attention. I'll try to find out what kind of car it is." "Okay," she whispered, feeling her anxiety grow. She circled the city for a while, but there was no word from her father. The tension inside her built up, and the ominous vehicle still didn't disappear. Unfortunately, her father never managed to investigate the situation. A few minutes later, Olivia received a call from Valerie. "Sweetie, your father is in the hospital," her stepmother said, with a tone that carried cold, calculated concern. "He's had a stroke." "What? My father?" "Yes," Valerie confirmed. "He's in intensive care. The doctors are fighting for his life." He came back from the restaurant all worked up. He kept going on about some inspection, then clutched his heart and collapsed. Without wasting time, Olivia drove to the hospital. Seeing her father connected to machines, she felt hot tears streaming down her cheeks. Valerie sat beside the bed, her face as indifferent as a statue's. It seemed she had been waiting for this moment for a long time, finally getting exactly what she wanted. The room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the faint beeping of the machines. Valerie seized the moment and approached her stepdaughter. "Well," she began in a quiet, sickly sweet voice. "You have to understand, your father hasn't been feeling well lately. This could have happened at any time." "What do you mean?" Olivia whispered, looking at her stepmother in confusion. "The doctor said it could be hereditary," Valerie explained. "You must know that his father passed away young as well." "Don't you dare talk like that." Olivia flared up. "You just want to take over my father's company, his money, everything he owns." Valerie merely shrugged. "And is that really unnatural? I'm not a stranger to him, after all. I think Antoine wouldn't mind. It's a shame he didn't prepare a will. With so much inheritance, there will be plenty of disputes. Stop acting like that. As if my father is already gone, do you hear me? He will recover." "I won't let you destroy everything he's built," Olivia retorted, barely holding back tears. "Well, we'll see," Valerie replied. "Let's see how you manage the business when you don't even know how a cash register works." With that, her stepmother left the room, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. At that moment, Olivia realized that she would now have to fight for herself and her future. She was no longer the naive girl she once was. Life had taught her a harsh lesson, and she was ready to fight to the end. First, she needed to deal with that ominous SUV. The night passed in a haze of worry for her father's life and shivers at every little sound. Expecting a call from the clinic at any moment, Olivia spent a sleepless night in a chair, clutching the phone. Fortunately, everything turned out okay. The crisis had passed. But that didn't mean she could relax. In the morning, after hastily downing a strong cup of coffee, Olivia headed to the restaurant. To her surprise, Valerie was already there. "Olivia, darling," Valerie purred, sitting down across from her in her father's office, which was now also Olivia's office. "I think it's time to get things in order." Antoine was, of course, a wonderful man, he still is. But as we've seen, his health leaves much to be desired. So, we need to think about the future of our family business. "What family business?" Olivia clenched her fists. "My father built all of this, and I'm not about to hand it over to you." "Don't get heated," Valerie smiled. "The law is strict, and without your father's signature, you can't do anything. But I can. I have all the necessary documents proving that I've put a lot into this establishment too." "Did you forge documents?" Olivia flared up. Valerie smirked. "Calm down, I'm just taking care of the restaurant's future and all of us. You're too young and naive to understand such complex matters." Olivia stormed out of the office, slamming the door. She needed to act, and fast. But who could she turn to? Who could she trust? Suddenly, her eyes fell on Victor, who was standing by the kitchen door, as if sensing her distress. "Victor," she called softly. "I need your help." Victor, who had been appointed manager shortly before Antoine's stroke, seemed to have matured rapidly in such a short time. He stood with confidence, and his eyes showed his readiness to help. "I'll help you. I'll do everything I can. My stepmother is trying to take over the restaurant." Olivia said in a trembling voice. She's forging documents, and I don't know what to do. Calm down, Victor gently took her hand. We'll get through this. Surprisingly, Victor proved to be resourceful and determined. He quickly gathered a team of loyal employees, those who respected Antoine's achievements and valued honest work. Mitch, who had become a close friend, was fully on Olivia and her father's side. We need to find all the documents that prove the restaurant still belongs to Antoine, Victor said, gathering everyone in the storeroom. And we need to prove that Valerie is lying. We need to dig into the old accounting records, suggested Alton, who had previously worked in law enforcement. All the receipts and supplier contracts are stored there. And, added Olivia, we need to find witnesses who can confirm my father's contributions to the business. Bank statements and personal testimonies from the banker who issued the loan for development. In the following days, they worked together, searching for documents, locating witnesses, and interviewing former employees. Meanwhile, Valerie, trying to hinder them, resorted to bribery and intimidation. But they didn't give up. They were fighting not only for themselves, but for Antoine, who was still in a coma. You're a liar and a vile schemer, Olivia began, entering Valerie's office, where she had gathered the board of shareholders. Taking advantage of the moment, you're trying to steal what doesn't belong to you. You're just a little girl who doesn't understand how the world works, Valerie sneered. Victor, sitting beside Olivia, held a folder of documents. Here is the evidence proving Olivia's legal rights to this restaurant. And also, he looked at Valerie with disdain, we have witness statements confirming that you personally forged the ownership documents. Valerie jumped up from her chair. It's all lies. Your documents aren't worth a thing. Well then, let's leave it at that, as you wish. I'm sure a competent lawyer will sort it all out quickly. A look of horror crossed Valerie's face. At that very moment, she realized she had lost, and her cunning plans had crumbled. You won't be able to hold me accountable, she whispered. Oh, we can, Victor replied. We absolutely can, unless you leave the restaurant willingly. Without a word, Valerie walked out of the office. At the door, she bumped into Mitch, who had a mysterious smile on his lips. Antoine has regained consciousness, the doorman announced. And he's very eager to see you. In that instant, a hopeful Olivia practically floated out of the office, feeling as if her life was regaining color, meaning, and love, all thanks to Victor, her savior and guardian angel. The ride to the clinic felt endless. Images of the past few days flashed through her mind, her arguments with her father, the strange situation with Victor and his sudden appointment as manager, the suspicious SUV following her, and, finally, her father's stroke. In the ICU room where Antoine lay, there was a deep silence. The dim lights, the smell of medication and medical equipment filled the air. Barely holding back tears, Olivia approached her father's bed. Dad, can you hear me? Antoine's eyes slowly opened. To her surprise, she saw relief in them, along with something that looked like joy. Olivia, he whispered, smiling. My girl. She leaned over the bed. Oh, Dad, I was so scared. It's okay. Thanks to the doctors, he said, his voice weak but steady. I found out who was following you. Well, not me personally, but someone I hired a week ago. Olivia froze, sensing that her father was about to tell her something very important. There were people connected to an old associate of mine, Antoine continued, pausing between words. A multimillionaire named Patrick Sander. Olivia turned pale. And why would he be interested in me? Antoine chewed on his lip for a moment, as if tasting his words, then said, they weren't so much watching you as they were watching Victor. Patrick, he's Victor's biological father. The room fell silent for a moment. Olivia couldn't believe her ears. Victor, the son of a millionaire? How is that possible? She whispered, unable to contain her genuine surprise. But then, why did he pretend to be a wanderer? Antoine gave a faint smile. Victor had a disagreement with his father. He said he could find work without his connections. So, it seems Patrick lost the bet. And I, unknowingly, became part of their game. I'm sorry, Olivia. I truly didn't know that Victor wasn't who he seemed to be. Patrick and I hadn't spoken in 10 years. We had our differences. And Valerie never liked him either. So, you really wanted me to marry the first stranger you met? Olivia couldn't hold back. A wanderer? Antoine nodded weakly. Just then, Victor approached. He looked at Olivia with tenderness and concern. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to deceive you. But I made a promise to my father, and I couldn't lose. Oh, so you wanted me to fall in love with you? Olivia interrupted. Is that what you wanted? Victor remained silent. Have you been playing with me all this time? She asked, her voice filled with hurt, disappointment, and something else. Believe me, I didn't want to hurt you. I fell in love with you myself. That's the truth. At that moment, Antoine, sensing the tension in the room, spoke up. Olivia, don't be so hard on Victor. He wanted, in his own way, to win your heart. But why? Olivia whispered, still unable to understand his motives. Why couldn't he just tell me who he was? Maybe Victor wanted to prove something to himself, that he was capable of more than just being the son of a wealthy father, Antoine replied for him. Olivia looked at Victor, at his embarrassed face, and in his eyes, she saw genuine affection and tenderness. Victor, she began, trying to collect her thoughts, I don't know what to think. And then, unexpectedly, he said, Olivia, marry me. An awkward pause filled the room. She glanced at her father, who was watching with interest. In his eyes, she saw not judgment but approval. Dad. Olivia began, holding back tears. Sweetheart. Antoine said. Give Victor another chance. I'm sure he's a good man, and I believe in his feelings. And besides, I think Victor would be a worthy successor for me in the restaurant. Olivia looked at Victor again. His eyes were full of pleading and such genuine love that it was impossible to resist. I agree, she replied quietly. Victor sprang up, wrapped his arms around Olivia, and kissed her tenderly. Antoine smiled and closed his eyes with a tired sigh.